Oops.
Good morning, Chicago. Good morning, educators. Good morning, gladiators fighting for the education of our children during these very difficult times. This is Rasha Al-Haj. I will be your moderator for today's webinar entitled E-Learning Tips for Teachers, Strengthening Literacies with Library Resources, presented by a wonderful co-worker from Chicago State University, Dr. Ray Ann Montague. Just a reminder that this webinar is part of the weekly series of free webinars offered by Chicago State University, along with free CPDUs for attending. But before we start, I'd like to go over some housekeeping. It is recommended that you view the webinar in full mode and have all other tabs or web pages closed for better viewing quality. If you encounter any technical problems, please try to troubleshoot your device or your internet connection independently. The majority of times, the technical troubles you might encounter can be solved on your end, and we have no way of attending to those issues, especially with such a large group. I would like to draw your attention to an important feature. If you look to your right on the control panel, you will see the question tab. Please write down your questions in the space provided. I will be reviewing those questions and sharing them with Dr. Montague at specific intervals throughout the presentation. Make sure your questions are sent to everyone and not private so I can see them and share them. We will be launching a few poll questions. If you set your screen to full mode, it will allow you to answer. If for some reason you cannot participate in the polls, that's okay. You can still type in your answer in the chat box. Please only use the chat box for the end. Remember, your questions will go under the Questions tab. The session will be recorded and shared. You will receive an email from us with your certificate of completion, the PowerPoint presentation, and the link to the recorded webinar. Finally, at the end of the webinar, we ask you to complete an exit survey sharing your evaluation of the webinar. And before we start the session, let me introduce you to Dr. Ray Ann Montague. Dr. Ray Ann Montague serves on the Chicago State University Information Studies Department faculty. She is a former teacher and school librarian. Her current research in library and information science centers around social justice and learning communities. Montague is interested in developing critical understanding of community engagement and facilitating effective information practices and services in schools and with underserved population. Montague is currently involved in scholarly activities for K-12 education at juvenile detention centers and with the LGBTQ community. Without further ado, I give the virtual floor to Dr. Ray Ann Montague.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here with everyone this morning. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you, to learn more about your experiences, and hopefully to support your efforts to provide quality education, particularly during this challenging time. I wanted to start with a little bit of an introduction about the Department of Information Studies and what we do within the College of Education at Chicago State University, because I think there's a number of folks who don't realize that there is an Information Studies department inside this College of Education. It is rather unusual. But what we do is, one of the things we do is focus on educating librarians. So we offer specializations for those interested in being academic librarians at colleges and universities, for folks who want to pursue careers in public libraries, you know, whether that's on the front end, working in public service, or in the back end, working with all of the behind the scenes work that goes into operating effective public libraries. We have educational opportunities for those interested in working with archives and special collections and records management, as well as, of course, school librarians, which is what we'll be talking about more, our focus on providing opportunities for those working in schools. We are an ALA accredited program. We're the only ALA accredited program in the city of Chicago, and we're really excited to have that designation. In terms of school libraries, we offer an endorsement program, which is an 18 credit hour program for those who already have certification, or we also have folks who come to pursue a full master's degree with a specialization for PK-12. So that's a little bit about our programs. And now I'd like to move on to find out a little bit more about the audience. So I want to launch a poll to find out about you. Please respond with one of the options. Okay, those numbers are going up, and seeing a large proportion of folks who are classroom teachers from pre-K to high school. It's looking about 75%, with about almost 25% specialists. That's where the poll is going. So very interesting. We'll let it go for a few more seconds before we stop. But that's really helpful for me to know who is the audience. Okay, now let's see. I need to get my presentation back. I don't have the option to pull up the screen. So let's see if one of the moderators can help me out to get the screen back. Okay, thanks. But yes, very, very interesting. Okay, that's wonderful for me to be able to know who we have here for this presentation. I don't see that my Chrome is available anymore, so let me switch over to this one. Okay, now we'll just move into PowerPoint mode. That might make things easier. Oh no, this is giving me presenter view. Sorry about that. Let me try slideshow. There. Okay, thanks so much for doing that poll. As we heard earlier, the focus of this presentation is to talk a little bit about literacies and how librarians are involved in promoting literacy. I think literacy is a very complex term. It involves the ability to identify, understand, understand, interpret, create, compute, and communicate using visible, audible, as well as digital materials. That I would say is a sort of the basic definition of literacy. It is a sort of traditional interpretation, which is evolving because in these times we talk about literacies shifting to beyond textual information and thinking about them in different contexts. So when we think about literacies in the plural, we are talking about multiple manifestations and how we might consider them in different contexts. We might talk about textual literacy, graphical, numerical, digital, media literacy, financial, cultural, eco-literacy, health, emotional, and so on and so on. And you'll notice at the bottom of each slide, that has information that came from a particular source. All those sources are linked so that you can access them. Okay, another quick poll, which will help me frame the sorts of things to talk about. Does your school have a school library? Yes, no, sort of, or not applicable because I'm not in a school. Sort of, so that could be perhaps you have a library without a librarian, or something like that. It's not always cut and dry in terms of thinking about what we have for library resources. Perhaps you rely on a different kind of library. Alrighty, so close to half, it looks like about close to half have a school library, which is great for those who do, but unfortunate, of course, for those who don't. Interesting to see that we have almost 30% with sort of. Huh. Wow, that's great. And I'll be interested to find out a little bit more about what that means. Perhaps a new area of research. What does having sort of a school library mean? Okay, let me get the slides back up. For those of you who have a school library currently or in the past, or have had experience yourself working with a school library, you know that school library is considered a learning hub for the community, for the school community. Librarians provide access to physical and digital resources and spaces. They connect across learning domains of thinking, creating, sharing, and growing. They encourage inquiry and diverse perspectives. Of course, librarians are involved with curating materials, texts, and collaborating across disciplines, across grade levels. It's really an interdisciplinary center at the school library where teachers are able to explore and engage towards becoming responsible citizens, workers, and scholars. So hopefully those of you who have libraries and sort of have libraries realize the benefits of these, and those without school libraries, that's something we certainly need to be working towards, having more opportunities for schools to have libraries. I know this has been a key issue, at least for those in the city of Chicago, even recently, that folks have been reflecting on the importance of making sure that all children have an opportunity to have a school librarian supporting their work. There are 6 foundations, according to the American Association for School Librarians, that are focused on, within the context of school libraries, inquiry, and these are just a few examples of how that might be manifest within the community. Building new knowledge through inquiry and critical thinking. Of course, having open-ended questions, or having activities like KWL, where students are pursuing research questions, offering opportunities to have diversity, exploring concepts beyond what they might have within their textbooks, collaborating again, working in small groups, inquiry-based projects, working with librarians to curate particular collections, which I realize has been happening a lot recently because of the current situation, but even in general, that's something that's happening. Exploring and engaging particularly using information ethically. So looking for reliable, viable sources, but also making sure that everything that gets used is used with proper attribution. Librarians, when we are thinking about teacher librarians and how our focus on literacy, we're often thinking about literacy in terms of information literacy, to promote inquiry, to promote independent learning, to promote metacognition, fostering independence and growth. These are things that we, as school librarians, emphasize for children and young adults who are using library resources and coming to libraries to develop their knowledge and skills. So I just wanted to share a couple examples of how this plays out. Sometimes people think about libraries as the people's university. There are a lot of different metaphors that people use for libraries. Sometimes people think about coming to libraries for slow learning, an opportunity to really dig into different kinds of questions and explore them more robustly than you can within the confines of a particular subject area or grade level, those sorts of things. You can really stretch and expand possibilities for inquiry within a school library. And thinking about that, and just before we move into thinking about some of the particular activities that librarians are involved with, both in general and during this pandemic, I have one more poll, but I want to contextualize it to say what are the most important library services for students usually. So this is not just during the pandemic, but what do you see as library services that are most vital for students in general? So let's bring up poll number 3. And this one you can click all that apply. So this one will definitely look a little bit different because the others were select just one. But also you'll notice some of these are rather large areas. They were condensed a little bit because our polling feature has only 5 choices. So some of it is it's a lot of Alrighty, let's see the results here as they're coming in. I will pull back up. Okay, there we go. Access to books and materials, physical materials, very important, but pretty much the same or very close to being the same as computers and online resources, web resources, and checking out books, very high. Having that welcoming space for studying, collaborating, and then library instruction and programs. Okay, that's really helpful to get an understanding there. When I think about the activities that librarians do, it's such a wide range of work, and some of it, of course, is very prominent and very well known and understood, and some of it is more in the background, and some of it only comes out from time to time. Promoting freedom to read is a really key, essential aspect of the work of librarians, including school librarians. Protecting rights to access information and disseminating materials, really supporting the First Amendment as well. And this is another area of librarianship that continues to grow as the digital world continues to expand. But we see librarians as part of supporting students in considering information and considering what information is viable and reliable and a good source of information, battling fake news, because there's lots and lots of information out there, but certainly not all of it is of the same quality, and a good amount of it is not even true. So, you know, helping students and others sort through what's really good and effective information is a key aspect of what librarians are working on. Also, looking at the sort of the scope of librarian responsibilities, thinking about staying really connected and forming local connections with the community. So whether that community is a school or, you know, whether it's the larger community, having programs and having possibilities for connecting with peers is really important. So one example that I wanted to include is the One Book, One Chicago, that's you know, been around for almost 20 years, but has really grown into possibilities for many people to come together and discuss literature and enjoy a lot of programs that emerged. When I'm going to talk about more about particular resources, I think it's important to think about particular resources that are available from the school, from school library resources, as well now as really tapping into the vast and wonderful resources available through public library systems. For example, Chicago, you know, has a wonderful broad set of resources that anyone who is in the city can access. So community-specific resources, as well as you know, being a link to global perspectives and global resources. So it's quite a broad range in terms of what librarians are working towards. Okay, I want to move a little bit into the idea of supporting folks who are working remotely, since that really is our focus right now, and this abrupt shift has moved everyone into thinking about how to support students, how to support teachers who are working at a distance, which we're all somewhat used to, but this has really accelerated the needs. So of course, my first suggestion is to consult your local librarian, your school librarian, your public librarian, other community librarians, in terms of making sure your information needs are met. In person right now, not really probably much of a possibility, unless they happen to be one of your neighbors that you can access by shouting across the road or something. Online, by phone, early and often. So I think it's important within the current context and in general, when thinking about preparing for the school year or preparing for certain topics that are coming up, check in with the librarian to see what they can suggest. Let them assist you in finding and providing materials that will support your students, that will encourage your students, that will motivate your students to become more engaged with the topics and the texts. I did add a photo of our library at Chicago State, the Gwendolyn Brooks Library. As you know, we're located on the south side of Chicago, 95th and Martin Luther King. So hopefully, once this crisis and this pandemic subsides, if you haven't already, you will come. You'll have an opportunity to come and visit our wonderful library that does offer lots of engaging programs and has wonderful resources. For those who are part of Chicago Public Schools, I would definitely encourage you to check out the resources that are available through the virtual library for CPS. There are many resources that are available through this portal that are organized by grade ranges, by subject, particular databases, books that are accessible online, and new resources that have been emerging because of the pandemic. Similarly, particularly for those who are in the Chicago area, definitely peruse what is available through CPL. As I said before, you know, a wonderful array of resources available. For example, the homework help that's open every day from 11 to 11 in English and Spanish, from early elementary through college prep for core subjects. Wonderful assistance that's available. I put that link to get a library card because some of the materials that are available through CPL do require having a library card, but it's possible to get that by contacting CPL these days remotely. So that would provide even more access to this set of resources. Okay, now in this slide, which is slide 17, I have a lot of just titles, a little bit about subjects, and some links. This is some ideas for e-learning, some web-based ideas for e-learning of different kinds of resources that have been around for quite some time. So this is not new material that has emerged. These are different sites that provide really wonderful resources that you could incorporate that that librarians have been talking about for quite a while. So I just selected a sample across different ages and subject areas. There are a couple here for STEM, the Digital Public Library of America, a lot of primary sources that are available, Fable Cottage, Modern Languages, Facing History, several from History and Social Studies that offer resources. Some of these have lesson plans. Some of them are more primary sources like Google Arts and Culture, which is a mix of visuals and also access to different collections. There are good opportunities these days to have field trips with a number of cultural institutions and museums, environmental science, ProCon, current issues, PBS Kids, which I imagine most folks are familiar with, Quizlet that offers flashcards across many subjects, chemistry specific, Teaching Tolerance, again, another great social studies resource, TED Talks that have been developed, particularly there are so many wonderful TED Talks, but there are TED Talks specific to that have been developed by children and teens. So that's always exciting to be able to see what youth themselves have created. Wolfram Alpha, really interesting knowledge base that you can type questions into and get curated results. Wonderopolis, an excellent and really fun resource that spans all kinds of subject areas and includes the wonder question of the day. Really a lot of fun for students. Of course, YouTube and other. I didn't include everything on here. This is just sort of a sampling of some of the resources that you might want to draw on to encourage students to consider. Of course, YouTube is a huge source like other kinds of Google resources, but there are particular channels that are really wonderful. And then at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that there's a link for AASL, the American Association of School Libraries, because every year they select best of the web. They also have a link that's, if you go to that link, for applications. So even beyond websites, thinking about best web or best app for teaching and learning, many more dozens of recommendations, and they review these each year. So you can even go back several years to see what has been vetted and what has been selected in terms of e-learning resources by librarians over time. Okay, let's go on to the next screen, which is more ideas for e-learning. These are free, and these are more in the newly available resources, because we have seen since the pandemic emerged that a lot of organizations, a lot of vendors have opened up their resources to educators, usually for a limited period of time. Sometimes, even during regular times, it's possible to gain access for a month or something to try out resources, but this has really emerged, that many folks are offering several months of open access. Some of these do require creating an account, in that sort of thing. So, but it's still access to free resources. So again, start with your local librarian, whether that's CPS, CPL, to get ideas for ebooks, for e-magazines, for audiobooks. Audible has a really wide collection of audiobooks available right now. And like I said, that just requires setting up a free account, checking out particular databases through your own school. Some examples here from CPS and CPL. That CPL link in terms of different databases and different resources that are available, just going through that extensive list. I don't know how many links are available there, but it seems to me that it's probably in the hundreds of different kinds of resources that CPL promotes access to. Read alouds. I hope some of you have been enjoying some of the read alouds and the interactive events that have been taking place because of what's going on with the pandemic. There are really many of these. For example, Michelle Obama is hosting Storytime, Dolly Parton, Jason Reynolds, offering reading and writing, live workshops, many other fantastic authors who are doing this, like Jay Pilkey's doing draw-alongs as well. So definitely consider having students, if students have a favorite author, invite them to see what they might be doing these days to provide live or special interactive opportunities, because that's really a lot of fun for students to be able to connect with different kinds of celebrities or authors that they appreciate. Okay, as I mentioned, there are also many resources that have emerged that are free and newly available as part of pandemic response. So a lot of these on this slide are from vendors. So we have Bound to Stay Bound, different presses. Some of these are databases like FactSite, reading promotion. The Junior Library Guild is also has authors who are speaking. Just looking down through this list to see, but mostly this is a list of vendors who have opened up at least parts of their resources for distance learning. So I would, encourage you to take a look and see which ones would best meet the needs of your students. I'm thinking now. I was going to pause earlier for questions, but I just kept on talking. So I'll check right now to see if any questions have come up that that I should respond to.
Yes, we have a few questions that came up. One of them, well, a few of the attendees were asking about classroom libraries, and they were wondering is whether, having a classroom library would be considered having a school library. They said that most teachers only have classroom libraries at the schools where they work at, no wide library in elementary schools in their district. So, classroom libraries.
I think, having any kind of library, whether that's, students building up their own home libraries, having classroom libraries, and now, in this context, thinking about having digital resources available as, a resource page with perhaps some resources or recommendations like the ones that are here that are now freely available for students to be able to have digital materials. Having classroom libraries is fantastic. So having, any kinds of libraries. I mentioned a little while ago, little free libraries. Oh, here, background there. Having little free libraries that are in the community libraries, public libraries, classroom libraries, school libraries, of course, is ideal, but I realize that's not the current situation for many people these days. So absolutely, having classroom libraries is a great idea.
Okay, many were asking about if any of those resources were available in Spanish, your knowledge.
Oh, yes, definitely. And so I would say definitely take a look with the CPS and the CPL resources, because many of those are available in Spanish. A couple that I mentioned here as well have, many of the resources that are available here as web-based favorites, and along with the new free resources, do have materials available in Spanish and other languages as well, but Spanish would be the most common. Also here, there's a link for described and captioned media. So for students who, many students who benefit from captioning, those resources are also available.
Okay. One more question about pre-K becoming full day for many CPS schools. Are school librarians being trained on the best appropriate practices for our young learners, as far as you know?
Could you repeat that question? It's a little tricky to hear.
Okay, so with pre-K becoming full day for many CPS schools, are school librarians being trained on the best appropriate practices for the young learners?
Oh, that is a great question. Yes, a great and timely question, and really wonderful, because that is certainly a focus that that we will be incorporating into our programs for school librarians even more. now. I know, I can only speak for Chicago State, but we do have early childhood education, so I'm sure there will be we'll be looking for opportunities to collaborate and be able to focus on the full range from pre-K to 12. And you probably noticed with some of these resources and links that I've shared here today, definitely there are possibilities of some of these vendors and some of these organizations that are offering quite a wide range of materials. So they would also span from pre-K up through secondary. But yes, in terms of education and our courses and our programs, making sure that we have courses like materials and resources for children. So we'll definitely want to have part of that coursework, specific coursework, being looking at the needs of early childhood.
Okay, we have a few more questions. Somebody was asking about research state about the importance of visual literacy.
Yes, visual literacy and being able to interpret different kinds of images and graphics, visuals. This is a huge part of young people's development. I think, in terms of libraries, we see this in areas like graphic novels, and librarians in general are big proponents of graphic novels and making those materials available to young people, because they are, as they're reading graphic novels, they're really engaged in developing literacy, textual literacy, and as well as visual literacy. So I think that might be an example for in terms of the libraries and what we're doing. I was talking a little bit before about how librarians are supporting students and the range of ways that librarians support students. So, particularly in terms of curriculum, but also thinking about, developing lifelong learners and promoting the enjoyment of reading. So it's again, I think, part of that range of developing knowledge and skills and independence in learning, and broadening horizons in terms of what are different possibilities for personal interest as well as for particular needs.
Hey, can we go for another question, and which I thought was really interesting? Someone asked about ideas on making a school library interactive to encourage students to engage more. Any ideas about that?
Well, absolutely. Making the school library interactive. I'm wondering, is this in the context of remote learning? Because, in terms of if we were in normal times and we had our physical libraries, I would expect that the library would be interactive regularly. And in terms of right now and promoting remote learning, I think a lot of that would be making sure that there are areas that are featured, that are focused on a regular basis, so that when students are visiting the library, they're able to see new and interesting, appealing possibilities. So, for example, with these long lists of different kinds of resources that are now available, if I was a school librarian, at at a school right now, I would be going through these resources to see what might be most relevant to my learning community, and then, you know, pulling out features to promote encouraging students to engage, to check them out, to try them out, to review them, to give feedback. It could be something, you know, as simple as having a poll and or rating these resources, or providing peer reviews for different resources. That is really something that is beneficial for the reviewer as well as the rest of the students to see. You know, students love to see what's neat and new and nifty and helpful. So, or in terms of literature, you know, what really drew them in, and what stories, what books they found, you know, really interesting and exciting. So providing opportunities to get that feedback and to promote that sort of peer engagement. I think there are many ways that could happen within the context of a school library. So hopefully, you know, you'll see those with school libraries are benefiting from this sort of interactive remote engagement, as well as, you know, during normal times, again, that you would see that in the library, that there would be opportunities for students to chime in and give their feedback.
Okay, the next question is this. With this pandemic, the trauma children are facing is at such high levels. Which of these resources should we as elementary and special ed teachers share virtually with students and their families?
Okay, so thinking about particularly in terms of dealing with trauma, I am not sure, you know, if any of these are particularly in terms of focused on dealing with trauma. I would say it really will depend on, you know, if that is something that you are wanting to share as a resource. I would need to do a little research to find out what particularly what resources would be best to do that. Most of the resources that I selected were more linked to different areas of the curriculum. So let me just take a quick look here to see if any of these pop up in terms of besides, of course, you know, the whole purpose of one of the key purposes of having the interaction with the read alouds is having that positive connection. And resources from places like Junior Library Guild, that's where, if I was going to research and find out which ones would have the best resources to help, I would probably start with that option. But I definitely need to look in terms of, I know that there have been a number of ebooks that have been produced, and I think I'm trying to remember if I saw it on CPS or CPL, that there have been some resources that have been curated specifically about, you know, storybooks that have been written to help children understand what's going on in terms of why everything has turned upside down and changed in their lives lately. So there definitely are some titles, some ebooks that have been written for different age levels to deal with the pandemic. So I would probably try and pull some of those specific books, and then you know, other kinds of resources in terms of adapting to change. But I didn't look for specific resources for that. But like I say, I would start with Junior Library Guild, and one of the reasons that they pop out in my mind is because I know one of the authors that they have featured right now is Rex Ogle. And Rex Ogle is the author of Free Lunch, which is a new publication that maybe some of you have seen, middle school focus, that talks about some of the trauma that he experienced, extreme trauma that he experienced as a young person, not related to the pandemic, of course, but just sort of how he was coping with that. And for older students, I would also, well, for other students, I would look to particular authors that have this focus. Again, not necessarily related to the pandemic, but people come to mind, like for high school, another new resource that was published, another book that was published, Ordinary Hazards, Nikki Grimes. So that's definitely secondary, talking about trauma that she experienced as a young person, dealing with a lot of issues. One other resource that comes to mind that I didn't list here particularly because it's really a little bit beyond the scope of this, but there's a review group that is called In the Margins, and In the Margins reviewers, and I am one of them. Oh, sorry, somehow I got muted. In the Margins is a group that reviews materials for young people who are struggling with all kinds of different issues, and then each year provides lists of fiction, nonfiction, and reference materials that could be really valuable. So I would say if I was your librarian and I was looking for resources, I might go to In the Margins, look up some of those publishers, some of those authors, and see what they're doing in particular these days in terms of this sort of new kinds of trauma that are emerging. Hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. We have another interesting question for you, Dr. Montague, about engaging librarians in meetings to help high school students write research papers over the summer. Teachers are asking if they could contact CPL. They already did, but there were no responses. Are there any resources where they could get the help from librarians, whether from their school districts or from, other collaboration with other schools? Any ideas about that?
Absolutely. I would say definitely be contacting, if you're in the Chicago area, or if you're in a different area and looking for help with research projects over the summer, check with your school district. So check with CPS, check with the public library, check with CPL. Other kinds of libraries can also be helpful. And so one of the reasons that I did put the Chicago State Academic Library there, which the focus of the Chicago State Gwendolyn Brooks Library is to support the needs of Chicago State students, but the library is open to others in the community, so you might have another kind of library that particularly, if it's part of a larger state institution or something like Chicago State is, I would say absolutely check with librarians to help suggest different resources for pursuing research, or different platforms that could be helpful. I didn't include as many of those kinds of resources here. Again, this is sort of like the top view of some resources that you might consider in order to support students in having access to different materials. But so again, if you had a research focus, I would step back and think, as a librarian, how would I support you in making sure that you have adequate resources and tools to pursue that. So definitely contact your local librarian, whichever type of librarian that might be. Because even if they aren't able to do something specific that you're wanting, hopefully they could suggest, who would be the best person to contact to help you get things set up so that it's effective.
Okay, we have one more question about homework help. Do you know if CPL is offering virtual homework help right now, or of any resources, other resources offering homework help?
Absolutely. So I'm going back to this this screen. So this is a screen from the CPL resource page for homework help. They are offering homework help 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day for English and Spanish. At least, perhaps other languages as well. But homework help is available every day for folks in the Chicago area.
Okay, great. Any final comments, Dr. Montague?
Well, I would just again like to reiterate my thanks for having this opportunity to share some of these resources with educators. I really appreciate all of the efforts that teachers are making, whether that's during normal times or during these extraordinary times, in terms of providing robust, engaging opportunities for students. And just reiterate that, librarians really can be extremely helpful in making sure that there are resources and means to engage. So talk to your librarian, contact them, as frequently, as regularly as you can, as it makes sense. We librarians love questions, so shoot us some questions and to see how we might be able to support your students and your learning needs.
Right. Thank you very much for the presentation, Dr. Montague. And thank you everyone for participating with us this morning. We would like to remind you that the session has been recorded and will be shared. You will receive an email from us with your certificate of completion, the PowerPoint presentation that has all those wonderful resources that Dr. Montague has shared, and the link to the recorded webinar. Feel free to share it with anyone who is interested. These webinars will also be posted on the CSU College of Education website, so you can also review the webinars that were already completed. As soon as you exit the webinar, we ask you to complete the exit survey. It will pop up on your screen, so please take a couple minutes to complete it. Your feedback is very important to us. Stay tuned for next week's webinar, Thursday, 8:30 till 9:30. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for being here with us this cold, stormy, rainy morning. Stay safe and have a wonderful, wonderful day.